you. I'm sorry, I just heard I ruined your whole day.
No, you put me to work. It's kind of job security. We can have a broader discussion if you would like it.
Hello, all. Thank you for calling into the pre-meeting. If you've called in, I don't know if anyone has. I see 5 people. Thank you very much. Looking at the agenda, relatively straightforward. Relatively. Quite a big consent agenda. Any issues with what's on the consent agenda? Is there anything that anyone wants to pull? Seems reasonable?
No.
Okay. Rory, you're looking thoughtful.
We don't have Ashley here.
Mm.
Look like Rumble's on the stairs of theirs, but
Good general
legal
principle.
recognition, so it's,
Fair. Would somebody be willing to make that vote to approve the consent agenda when we do come to that time?
Go ahead, Ernest. Go right ahead.
That's very exciting. Thank you. That works for me.
it took me a lot of reading through that CIP meeting to realize that this wasn't the latest CIP reading, and I was
Oh,
so
no.
confused about the projects.
Funny.
I never said that.
I did not make that connection. Thank you, sir. A lot of the same issues keep coming back every year.
It's true. Some of them look very familiar.
An issue that I'm going to raise in my report, I'm currently without vice. I have no vice chair.
I was gonna ask about that. Do we wanna wait until they've appointed somebody and just hope we don't get hit by a bus? So that we have a full, or do we wanna appoint now, or do we wanna?
I mean, our organizational meeting is in what,
Like 1 month.
September
No.
or August?
So it would be a very short tenure.
Oh, man, we're already getting there.
Okay.
Being a beer next
If you
month?
get hit by a bus, I'll.
Ooh, I hear a self nod.
No, just, if no one else will do it for the week,
Okay.
the month, I'm fine.
Something to consider. We can have the discussion during the full meeting, but I wanted to have it.
Yeah, I was
On
just
your
thinking
mind.
about that too. As long as you don't get hit by a bus, we should.
I
Can you
try.
stop saying that?
Terrible.
You're the one who keeps getting
I mean, he
hit by
walks to
things, so-
work.
I guess he did get hit by things that Reed.
That was a truck. Or no, that was an SUV.
Oh, well, in that case.
All right, well, just hope you don't get hit by a bus.
Just
Okay.
Turning to past all of that, we do have a public hearing about the Salvation Army. Any questions for staff on that item?
Did they have a plan for what to do with parking when the thing's under construction?
I guess we'll find out.
I didn't see that. I wasn't sure if, well, yeah. Yes, I
Mr.
wasn't sure if I
Oakley,
missed that.
The applicant will speak to that. That came up in their community meeting, and they can speak more to it. Basically, none of their services are going to be interrupted during construction.
Mhm. Okay. They're keeping the portion where the new parking lot is going, they're keeping that until the rest of the building is complete, I think. Yeah, so kind of like where are they gonna park when there's, yeah.
Any additional questions on this item? Sir?
May I address the commission, please?
Please.
My name is Jay Stroman. I'm the new city attorney, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I had a brief conversation with Commissioner Stolzenberg about the statute that he raised with LUPA and some correspondence earlier today, and I would merely say that that is a nuanced question. There are certainly legitimate.
Which statute is this, sir? Which statute is this?
I'm sorry, this is RLUIPA. This is the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act.
Thank you.
And I wish I knew the citation by heart, but it's in the federal code. And that's basically a statute that prohibits local governments from unduly burdening religion or applying different standards in making a land use decision. And clearly, we don't see the latter issue as playing any role in it tonight, and certainly in the research that we have done, it suggests that there could be legitimate land use reasons for the Planning Commission, to either recommend in favor or against. So at this juncture, it does not appear that that RLUIPA should play a role in our advice. Our office's advice was that statute does not really play a role in your determination of this item at this juncture. And obviously, any discussion of the religious roots of the applicant or their need to do so is really outside of narrow land use criteria that you're bound to apply in making a determination on a special use permit. So thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
And if you don't, if you'll indulge me, I was coming in, I was very hurried, and I was asking one of my other clients who I needed to chat with, is Commissioner Stoltenberg, and he said, well, the guy with the beard, I must tell you, that doesn't narrow it down very much. Anyway, it's a pleasure, and thank you for allowing me to do that. If I may offer one other observation.
Please.
With respect to the application that you will consider tonight, there has been a change in the law that I think is certainly Director Freese and I have discussed, and Senior Planner Creasy, and depending on sort of what happens tonight, if the commission should conduct a public hearing and offer a recommendation, then it's likely that I will ask council to consider a motion consistent with the changes that have been made to 15.2.2204. If the commission elects not to offer their recommendation this evening, then I may ask for a point of order, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, and offer a similar motion that I think would address some of the changes in the notice statute relating to, without getting too deeply into it, but I'll get as deeply as you'd like, just making sure that the record is clear that this public hearing is being conducted this evening or this afternoon with the potential intention to adopt. And so we want to make sure that we check that box so that the commission is protected from a procedural standpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you
If we
again.
do move forward, does Mayor Stook need to consider that motion, or are we complete?
So my suggestion, but it's merely that, is as your discussion progresses, if it appears that it would be appropriate to have a motion by have the commission consider a motion in addition to the council, what I've typically done in the past is to say point of order, and if the commission is willing, I'll then come to the podium and offer that suggested motion verbally, if that's all right.
This is helpful, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I guess,
And
I think I'm maybe a little lost. What is 15 point whatever in?
So let me give you just the thumbnail sketch. The Code of Virginia, 15.2.2204, provides for the advertising requirements for the consideration of a land use matter, both by the commission and by the council. The General Assembly, in its wisdom, added some language. I'm going to grab my code book if that's all right. Added some language that ties the advertising requirements to both the Planning Commission and the council's intention to adopt. So now it's not just, here's the advertising requirements that you have to conduct the public hearing, but here are the advertising requirements that you must have to conduct a public hearing on a given day with the intention to adopt. It's entirely possible the Planning Commission may hear the comments tonight, have a discussion, and simply move forward with a recommendation. If it doesn't, I'm going to suggest language to continue consideration of this item with the intention to adopt, so that your consideration in that motion is consistent with the new language that's been added to the statute. And the purpose of that is merely to ensure that the record is clear, that the commission and the council are completely in compliance with this new language. I will tell you that.
Is this something we're gonna have to do at every public hearing, or is this something we can do to modify the way we notice, so that we don't have to do this at every public hearing?
I'm going to give you an answer lawyers give that's not always popular. It depends. This is an evolving issue. I think to the extent that the Planning Commission conducts a public hearing and offers its recommendation at that meeting, I don't believe that any further motion is going to be required by the commission.
This only happens if there is a deferral.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And that's for the commission. For the council, it's possible that they almost never, it's my understanding, but I just got here, would act when you make your recommendation at the same meeting. And so it's likely that there will be motions that will be required for them probably on a regular basis. For the commission, perhaps not, depending on when you decide to offer your recommendation. Is that helpful? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond.
And I apologize for ruining your whole day with that RLUIPA question.
Commissioner Stolzenberg wants to make sure I stay in practice on my legal research. I'm very grateful for that.
So Rory, what was the objective of your question? I was trying to read into it. Why is he even taking a chance of rabbit holes? There had to be a reason.
Well, it's just curiosity, really. I didn't think it would come into play anyway, but, you know.
I mean, he even said a disclaimer, don't scramble to get me an answer.
I did say that in my defense.
He did, and, you know, he was summarily ignored apparently.
The wrong part of it to summarily ignore.
Fair. We have a little bit of time left. Any other issues that we need to discuss in this 11 minutes?
I did have, oh, sorry. I did have one question that I forgot about on the Seminole Square subdivision. Why is that, like, right around the roundabout, they're dedicating some land to the public right-of-way, or it's like a current landscaping easement or something? Why, what's the purpose of that? And does it mean, like, the city now has to maintain that land, or?
Yes, it does. They are dedicating that to us as public right-of-way. The reason is because of our wonderful setbacks for highway corridor. They have, I think it's a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 20, and that curvy right-of-way makes a curvy, funky maximum setback that they just couldn't meet with the existing building.
Could have been a really weird-looking building.
Yeah,
But,
so rather than pursue a variance, they just gave us the right-of-way.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell? Did you have something?
I did.
Mr. Schwartz,
So, yeah, question for staff on the Salvation Army. We did receive an email, let's see, it went through the, get the date on this. On the 10th, from Miles Hingley.
Yes.
And he listed a bunch of possible solutions to the pedestrian network issues around there. And I'm just kind of curious if any of those are even remotely possible. So it was build a bike path west to 5th Street from the end of 4th Street for access to the on-grade crossing at 5th Street. Build a bike ped bridge over the tracks. I know that's part of a master plan. Require a sidewalk with 24-hour public access on the lot line between the fire station and the Salvation Army, connecting Ridge Street to the 4th Street, and improving the sidewalk on Ridge Street, the bridge, making it wider or offering some sort of protection.
So it's kind of broken down to two parts. The off-site improvements we typically don't do with SUPs. When we do our SUPs, we're typically doing conditions that are reasonable and mitigate the impact.
Understood. I guess it's more of, are they even possible? Like, is there room to improve the sidewalk?
That was going to be my next part. When you're talking about improvements that are adjacent, that abut the property, similar to the sidewalk between the fire station and the subject property. I mean, you're getting into then removing kind of by right setbacks, which are 0 for that zoning district. So there's some nuance. I would say the Ridge Street side is definitely probably the more problematic side. There's a code section that speaks to existing sidewalks. You're not required to provide sidewalks, so you get into that side of it. There is hopefully a smart scale project down the road for improvements to Ridge Street. So I mean, that's part of the consideration too.
And I guess my question wasn't actually for the applicant to provide this, but if they were even possible physically to fit those things in there for the city to do in the future. I wasn't sure if, I can't remember I remember there was a smart scale project, I just can't remember how it all worked out. I'm probably testing your memory.
Yeah, and I won't speak in absolutes, but I believe the smart scale is more on bike lanes and removing a few on-street parking spaces. I believe that right-of-way is pretty tight, especially at the intersection.
Okay. Sorry.
So
That was a rabbit hole.
I think we don't have the right of way to get to Fifth Street, right? Like that's owned by the tow lot
Yeah.
thing, and then it's just the railroad, right?
Yeah.
There's no like city in between the railroad or anything.
I mean, I'd have to look at the map again, but so the pedestrian bridge has always been a long-term bike ped goal.
Yeah.
But there are no active projects or even future active projects.
And I guess
address
I
it.
don't understand that one like at all, like how it got into the bike ped plan. I wasn't around, but like you would need, I mean, to get the at least 30 feet up, I'd imagine for CSX to let us have the vertical, aerial easement. You would have to make that ADA compliant, like a very long.
I mean, I
what,
think a
like
lot of the goals in
1,500?
that plan were aspirations. I mean, look at the Valley Road Extended Tunnel is another example. I mean, I don't think when they were tied to the comp plan, they weren't in detail. These were
We were going to
access
make
points.
UVA pay for that one. So. I mean, that's fair. Okay. Yeah.
I'm looking at the Charlottesville GIS website. Here, there is a public right-of-way from 4th Street to the railway right-of-way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then it.
But
can't
not
go east or west.
yeah. But the project does have a connecting sidewalk along the north side that can get you from Fourth to Ridge, right?
No, that's one of the applicant will speak to, that's one of the concerns that came up to in the neighborhood is you're getting a lot of cut-through traffic, and the proposed development would actually try to alleviate that, so you get a lot of people not cutting through the Salvation property to get over to Fourth Street.
And the neighbors don't want to be able to cut through?
Correct, I mean, that's been a concern of the surrounding neighborhood, is this cut-through traffic from Ridge Street into,
You mean vehicular?
no, pedestrian.
But okay. I'm a little confused, but okay.
Yeah, currently, there is space for people to cut through, but that has been an issue that has been raised as far as that this proposed redevelopment would help cut down on that. And so pedestrian traffic would go down along public streets and stop cutting through private property.
Don't we want pedestrian connectivity?
Well, we can't require it through private property.
Well, so I guess, is the Salvation Army removing it because the neighborhood doesn't want the connectivity, or does the Salvation Army not want to put in the connectivity?
It's, my understanding from the public engagement meeting, it's been some people in the neighborhood don't want that cut-through traffic. That has been a sore spot.
Huh.
I see.
I thought it was the traffic of, okay, interesting.
Rory, you really do get this story. You think about it, you understand what they're thinking.
I mean, I understand
I
it.
want to make sure you.
Well, but that's not even, I mean, if they're talking cut-through traffic, are you talking not even like residents of the shelter? Or like just not like other people is what they're mad about?
We're digging deep here.
I-
Let's
Yeah.
Might
wait
be a
till we
little
get to
deeper
the
now. We
Fair
hearing.
enough, fair enough. Well, I'll stop.
Indeed. We do have 4 minutes left. Are there any further questions for staff on this item?
I'll ask a question.
Please.
Were there any considerations of having like an easement or something to the Nolan property since there's a traffic light there for vehicular access? That came up, I don't know.
I'll defer to the applicant when they give the presentation. There's not one I'm aware of.
And I just wanted to mention a thing, since it's not directly this application, but like that whole like build to, I mean, the exemption they're asking for the build to width to save the tree, seems like it has a lesson to draw for the new ordinance. I mean, I guess it could technically be a pedestrian amenity area if they put in a bench or something, and then it would count in the build to zone, but.
I believe you have a work session coming up.
Sounds like it applied to that site plan for Seminole Square as well, right?
You're not wrong.
Anything further on this item? I would be open to a short break before we start formally, if that's of interest. Sure. I see thumbs. Let's resume in 3 minutes. Forgetting the word, resume.
I think we still, Phil, bathroom.
He's printing down this one.
Oh, all right then.
Okay, welcome all to the July 11th Charlottesville Planning Commission meeting for 2023. I would like to start with commissioners' reports. Mr. Mitchell, can you start us?
Nothing to report.
Mr. Duranzio?
2 items. First, the HAC met third Wednesday of June. They took a look at Module 3, asked the subcommittee to take a closer look at that. The noticing on that was somehow went astray because people didn't know to be there. But I'm not sure how that happened. But at any rate, one member of that committee wrote up a bunch of recommendations provided to you, Mr. Chair, and to the mayor, and to Mr. Freeze. Most of it regarding compactness in terms of alleys from 20 to 10, narrowing things like easements, et cetera. I think that some committee members may offer some edits on that, but that document is available and might be worth looking at on Thursday. Second is that the CAF committee met today as a workshop to try to figure out TikTok and policies and procedures, and we're working on that.
Exciting.
TikTok with a CK.
Really threw me for a loop
Oh,
there.
I see. Oh, very good.
Yes, the T.
Mr. Habab?
Thanks. The tree commission rescheduled their meeting to today from last week since it was a holiday. And I'll report more on it next time as I get notes from the commission. But on the agenda, the codes committee submitted recommendations for modules 1 through 3 in June with a meeting with city staff and consultants. And a fun item I saw was that on the invasive plant control, the city will be using goats to make initial entry on Fry Springs and Washington Park, and then they'll return to do some probably spot herbicide applications on regrowth. And they're doing some chemical treatments and mulching at Forest Hill Parks, Azalea Park, and the trail system from Jordan Park to 5th Street Station. That's it for me.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz?
For last month's BAR meeting, we approved a sort of restoration, preservation of the historic painted signs on, I don't know which side street that is. It faces the Dewberry Unfinished Hotel.
Second.
Yes, thank you. So that'll be an interesting project to watch. They're going to do that in August. Should take a week or two for the artist to complete it. And it's, as opposed to a full restoration, it's really just to kind of bring the and there's a lot of layered signs on there, so something that it's just a fun little thing that's going to be going on. We also looked at this Salvation Army project, which I think you saw our minutes in our packet. And this month there will be no BAR meeting because there were no applications. So, yay.
Thank you. Mr. Stolzenberg?
Yeah, and one meeting this month of the Downtown Mall Committee, City Managers Committee, we discussed side streets and access. It turns out every side street has a slightly different pattern of traffic and parking, and how much of it is bricked and pedestrian and how much of it is not. And some of them work okay, and some of them work very poorly. And some of them, of course, are through streets. So there was a robust discussion, kind of spiraled into talking about an all-around access and loading plan. Yeah, it sounds like Mr. Freeze has work cut out for him. Coming up next week, we have an MPO tech meeting. We'll be talking about all sorts of stuff, including, and maybe especially, that moving towards 2050 long-range transportation plan, one piece of news I've had in advance is that we did not get the raised grant for preliminary engineering for the Rivanna River pedestrian bridge. That's all I got. And maybe we'll have a new chair of MPO Tech next week, with any luck.
Thank you for the bad news. Mr. Palmer, is he joining us today?
Not today. He's out of town.
You are missed, sir. As for me, the big news is I am without a vice chair, and should something terrible happen to me, for example, a bus was proposed as one option, we would have procedural challenges. I ask you, the commission, to consider giving me a vice chair.
I would like to move that we appoint Commissioner Mitchell as the temporary interim vice chair until we get to our next organizational meeting, considering he used to chair this body.
Do I hear a second on this motion?
Second.
I hear a second. Ms. Creasy, would you call the roll?
Sure.
He doesn't get a choice.
I don't, not gonna get hit by a bus. Unless I have confidence.
All right, we ready?
Please.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yes.
Mr. Duranzio?
Yes.
Mr. Stolensberg?
Aye.
Mr. Habab?
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
And Mr. Sully Yates?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you all very much. That is some comfort.
Oh, if I may, Mr. Chair, I do have
Please.
one quick amendment to mine. The CDBG Home Task Force will be meeting twice in July to contend with the latest round of funding to get it to this body as quick as possible. 18th and 24th.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to hear, actually, I suppose, Neighborhood Development Services might have some thoughts. Cedric?
A few. Just a reminder that we have a work session this Thursday from 5 to 5 to whenever, scheduled from 5 to 7. This one is in the basement conference room of City Hall. So I will, in each reminder that I give throughout the week, I will be clarifying location. If you come here, you would be part of the police review board.
Oh.
So there is a meeting here. It's just not the one you're supposed to be at. And we've got a discussion about Module 3 as well as the residential districts in the zoning ordinance. So a very exciting discussion. We'll have some visuals to share, some of the things that have been requested along the way.
How deep do you think we will get into Module 3? Is this gonna be a superficial review, or we're gonna get deep?
It's probably higher level, but if you all have some concerns or thoughts that you want to dig into in Module 3, let us know, and we'll make sure that we are prepared for that. So, the other thing I had was the vice chair, but you were already all over on top of that, so we're good to go there. Mr. Priest, do you have anything to add? Okay. Because we're going to be talking zoning ordinance at length on Thursday, we won't have any additional zoning ordinance discussion for this evening.
Thank you. This time, I would like to turn to the public. If you would like to discuss an item not on the main agenda, which is only, I believe, the Salvation Army public hearing, this is the time, please.
All right, so we will do our proper procedure on this, where we ask everyone who would like to speak during matters from the public can speak up to 3 minutes. We will start with our in-person audience and ask for those interested in speaking, and then we will move to our virtual audience, and we will alternate back and forth and make sure that we address all of our speakers. So I will start by asking if we have anyone in our in-person audience who would like to speak during matters from the public. Okay. We'll turn to our virtual audience, and we have Mr. Bill Emery.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I'm way at the edge of internet land. Very iffy connection here. I know you guys aren't talking about zoning tonight, and my comments aren't particularly organized. But regarding rights, sometimes it's called a gray field, sometimes it's called a scrapyard, or sometimes it's called a property down in a hole. Never anything particularly complimentary. But I think that you guys are sort of potentially veering away from the mapping logic document, which would suggest that this was supposed to be a neighborhood mixed-use parcel and that you're more trending towards Index 5. Commissioners have argued that rights needs to be an urban center, like a downtown mall, but with light industrial thrown in. Commissioners have spoken about how the Planning Commission landed the plane on this back at your May work session. That would be hard to check. I mean, I don't know, I haven't been able to find minutes for the May work session. But I'd like to suggest that before you deviate from the mapping logic document, that you land the plane regarding the Willow Mills 1988 formal small area plan request to City Council. Additionally, I'd encourage you to speak with the scrapyard property owner and the adjacent neighbors regarding your plans for where they are, where they work, where they live. Index 3 seems more appropriate in most cases on the draft zoning map. It seems like when you drop mixed use into neighborhoods, you do Index 3 as opposed to Index 5. And where you have done that, Index 5, like over in Star Hill, they've actually had the benefit of a small area plan. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I'll check with our in-person audience. Do we have any speakers for matters from the public? All right, seeing none, I'll move to our virtual audience. Robin Hoffman. Robin?
Hi, I am sort of concerned about the rain bombs that we've been having over near East High. I just want to observe for you, we've been having continuous sort of flooding in the streets. It's something that you don't see unless you're right here, but it's actually getting worse. So I want to say it's like, as soon as it rains, the water just comes from I don't know where and rushes through the streets here on Fairway and Caroline and all the little streets, Meade Avenue and everything, and it doesn't really have a place to go. So, for instance, that area that's in the field there that they want to build 251 residents, just to give you an idea, as soon as a rain happens, it's just mush over there, right? So what I'm thinking about is, do you guys really understand that happening? How the water is traveling, and is that area in the field actually a watershed area? I'm just wondering if does anybody actually know what happens with the water when it goes through the streets here, and then, and what happens if that field is not a field anymore, if there's nothing to absorb it? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I will look to our in-person audience again. Any speakers for matters from the public? All right, seeing none, I'll move to our virtual audience. We don't have any hands raised. If you're interested in speaking and you're in our virtual audience, please raise your hand in the Zoom app. If you're on a phone line, doesn't look like anyone is, but you would hit *9 and that would raise your hand. Chair, it looks like we may have all of our speakers during matters from the public at this time.
All right, thank you very much.
Mhm.
At this time, I would like to turn to the consent agenda. I believe Mr. Stolzenberg, you had some thoughts about that?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
You do?
Ms. Creasy, would you call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Schwartz?
I'm going to abstain because of the minutes.
Mr. Durantia?
I watched that meeting.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Habab?
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoli Yates?
Aye.
All right, Pierce?
We have a 15-minute gap. Would you like to use that in some way? I would also entertain an idea to take a break. We're so efficient.
Take a break.
Take a break.
I hear a break. Let's resume at 6 p.m. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, that was awful. I actually thought it was me. Oh, no, I did too. I thought it was part of like what was going on. That was
Twenty.
the aerobics room was working, the air conditioning, so I had to go in there every now and then. I was like, man, what happened? Yeah, I went out last night, but not much.
Is this live? Oh, okay. Nice.
Welcome all. I would like to open the joint City Council and Planning Commission public hearing for applicant Salvation Army of Charlottesville. Mr. Mayor, is the council in order?
We have a quorum of council here. The city attorney has raised an issue. Is this something we raise now?
I think we'll raise it following the conclusion of the public
Okay. All right. We'll deal with that later then. There's a picky little point under the Freedom of Information, under 15.2-2204, blah, 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 that we'll raise at the end of things. But yes, we have a quorum here.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Offley, can you tell us about this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Matt Alfley, City Planner, Neighborhood Development Service. Tonight, you will be holding a public hearing and making a recommendation to City Council regarding a special use permit for a sheltered care facility at 2007 and 2011 Ridge Street. The applicant, the Salvation Army of Charlottesville, is pursuing an SUP in order to expand the existing shelter care facility, modify yard setback requirements, and reduce on-site parking. The applicant is proposing to redevelop the property and expand the existing services. To date, the use of the shelter is legal nonconforming, and any expansion of that use beyond what is permitted under Section 341147B requires approval of an SUP. That code section speaks to nonconforming uses other than structures may be expanded on the area of the lot not originally devoted to the nonconforming use, provided such expansions meet all current requirements of this chapter and applicable only to the expansion. It goes on to state that permitted expansion for non-residential nonconforming uses that require a special or provisional use permit are required to obtain a special or provisional use permit only when such expansion exceeds 25% of the gross floor area of the existing structure. The code only speaks to nonconforming use expanding within existing structures and does not address new construction, addition, or renovation. In other words, the shelter could expand by 25% within the existing building, but any new building expansion or redevelopment requires the applicant to obtain an SUP under the current code. The applicant is proposing to redevelop the site and expand from 58 emergency shelter beds to 114 emergency shelter beds, expand meal capacity from 80 seats to 120 seats, increase the size of the multipurpose room from 1,928 square feet to 2,415 square feet, and expand the meeting room's capacity from 40 seats to 84 seats. To facilitate these expansions, the applicant, in addition to requesting the SUP for shelter care facility use, is also requesting alterations to the yard setback, street wall requirements, and on-site parking requirements. The specifics of these requirements can be found in the staff report. Although it is not in your report, I would like to go over verbally a few of the how the existing zoning and what is being proposed in the draft zoning would deal with this plan. And the reason I didn't put it in it is because we all know the draft is still a draft. It's until it's adopted by City Council. There was not a full analysis done on the draft, but just to hit some highlights between where they are now, what they're asking for, and where the plan is where we're going with the code, is shelter care facility under the current code requires an SUP. With the SUP that they're pursuing would be allowed, and then under the draft zoning, it would be a by right use. The height would stay the same of having a minimum 35 feet height, so you have a minimum and a maximum of 52. That would stay the same. Under the proposed code, you would have an eight-story building, but it could be up to 10 depending on if shelter care is considered affordable, which we have not looked at that, so I can't tell you if it'd be 8 or 10, just depending on how we define shelter care, if it's residential and affordable. Under our current code, shelter care facility is under the residential portion of the code. It's under a civic under the draft zoning ordinance. It's not under residential, but under civic. Parking under the current code is required based on uses. What they're requesting is a reduction to 0, but their plan is showing 32, so it'd be around 32, and staff does address that in some of the draft conditions, which we can speak to later. Under the proposed draft zoning ordinance, parking would not be required for this site. So that is just kind of an overview of some of the big picture differences between where we are with the current code, what they're requesting in the SUP, and the draft zoning ordinance. Staff and Planning Commission has received a lot of public comments related to the SUP. Many of these comments express support, while others are concerned with increased traffic, trash, and parking, and the impact that the development would have on 4th Street Southwest. This concludes staff's prepared remarks. I'm happy to answer any clarifying questions before turning this over to the applicant's representative, Erin Hannigan, with Mitchell Matthews and Associates, where she will give a presentation and take questions.
Mr. Mitchell?
Got a couple of questions about the recommendations, if it's appropriate to ask.
Please.
So, Matt, you and I talked a little bit about this before. Parking is a major worry for many people, me as well. But you've got a recommendation on page 15, recommendation number 4. That recommendation will allow them to reduce the parking to 32 and actually go to 0 so that they can eventually build in the space that those 32 are parking spaces are in. Is that accurate?
So I don't think there's an immediate plan to go to 0 parking. It leaves them some flexibility for future phasing, but it would not go that low for what they're proposing right now.
Okay.
That condition, staff, the city traffic engineer did review this application. They felt around that 32 range was fine. If they drop below that, we know traffic parking is a concern. This would give the city staff, the traffic engineer, a chance to work through any type of plan as the number drops.
So the objective of your recommendation is to give them the flexibility to go there if they need to?
It gives them the flexibility to keep reducing parking, but it does allow the city to influence that as it relates to how they're going to handle parking moving forward, whether that's off-site, alternative forms. So it basically gives them the flexibility to plan for the future, but also an avenue for the city to also help make sure parking does not become an issue.
Yeah, so the objective of that is not only to help them, but also help with the parking and manage the parking as it becomes more.
That's correct.
More and more difficult. And the recommendation number 6, I think we talked about that. I think I got the answer. Recommendation number 6 was to give them 2 more years, and that's just a phasing.
That is my understanding. The applicant can speak to this. They're about 2/3 to their fundraising goal, and just how our code is set up, and SUP could expire after 18 months if they don't have an approved site plan, but city council can adjust the timeframes. So this just, if they were needed to come forward and request an extension of the SUP, the code outlines a year, but this would give that an extra year.
Mr. Valencia? Mr. Haval?
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Schwartz?
I don't think I have any questions.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
So this is an increase in parking over the current conditions, right? It's just,
It's a reduction. You mean like existing condition?
yeah, it's a reduction versus like what they would have to do with the expansion, given our parking requirements for shelters,
Yes,
right?
yes. This is, I believe it's around 50, 52 spaces is what they would be required under current regulations.
I mean, not that you were there in 2003 or 19, whatever, but like, where does the ratio of parking spots to beds for a shelter come from for that requirement? Like, how do we even get that number?
I don't have a good answer for you, Commissioner. Just basically it's using what's in the code.
Yep, fair enough. Okay, thanks.
As for me, very clear, thank you. Mr. Pinkston?
No questions at this point.
Ms. Payne?
Likewise, none for me right now.
Ms. Purrier?
No questions at this point.
Mayor Snook?
Not for me either, thank you.
I believe we are set. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, I'll turn it over to the applicant for the presentation.
Thanks, Matt. Again, I'm Erin Hannigan with Mitchell Matthews Architects and Planners, and I believe we have a prepared slideshow that'll come up. So joining me tonight is John Matthews, Principal in Charge. Also here is Campbell Bolton with Timmons Engineering, who will join me towards the end of the presentation to talk specifically about the site design. And then representing the Salvation Army is Captain Mark Van Meter, the commanding officer, as well as Brenda Smith, the residential program manager, both of whom will speak during the public comment section and can answer more specific questions about the Salvation Army's program and their current statistics. Next slide. So about the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army is a nonprofit, faith-based organization that works to alleviate human suffering and distress without discrimination. They provide both disaster relief and emergency assistance. The Salvation Army has been serving Charlottesville since 1912. They have occupied this site at 207 Ridge Street since around 1965. The Salvation Army is the only year-round shelter available in Charlottesville. Last year, they helped more than 21,000 individuals and families with critical social services. They currently cannot accommodate all of the unhoused individuals and families who need their help. Reading from their goals, the Salvation Army's goal is to have each person they serve partner with the Salvation Army in the Pathway of Hope program. Their plan is to assist in breaking the cycle of poverty and to assist individuals and families to achieve their goals through securing stable jobs, housing, and becoming self-sufficient. Here we're looking at existing aerial photos of the site. The existing site is occupied by 3 buildings, again built between 1965 and 1992. The chapel, administrative offices, and gymnasium were first developed in 1965. This is the building at the street. I apologize, I didn't bring a laser pointer, but the 2 closest to the street labeled with 207, and then it stretches back along the Nolan side of the property. Around 1980, they built the emergency shelter at 211 Ridge Street, which is the building on the 4th Street side of the site. Around 1992, perfect, thank you. They added the transitional housing building and the soup kitchen.
One click only.
Nope.
It's the most confusing laser pointer in existence.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
There we go.
No.
No?
You're gonna want to turn the dial again. The dial's different from the, but that's the type of light. Right now it's like black light. Phil, yeah, just turn the thing on.
It's ridiculous, but yes. Oh, you got it. Excellent.
Is it working?
Yes, it should be, except that we've got
Stars and.
mice and.
There you go.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So this building here is the transitional housing building, and that was added in 1992 at the center of the site. The issues cited with the existing conditions include that the facilities are no longer have the capacity to serve the need. The men's shelter is constantly full. There is no good space to accommodate families or clients with other specific needs. The current facilities are in 3 buildings, so even though it's an addition for the transitional housing, they're not directly connected through interior corridors. Therefore, the programs they house are disconnected, and it makes it difficult to staff the facility, and currently the transitional housing is not being used. Additionally, they mentioned poor wayfinding on the site. The main entrance doors seen off Ridge Street here, again, lead into the chapel, which is not the services that most people are looking for when they arrive on site for help. And there's lack of visibility for the community to all the services that are actually provided on site. So if we can scroll through. So this is, again, another angle. We're above Monticello Avenue at this point. If we go again, this is above 4th Street Southwest. So you can see the emergency shelter building located back here. There's a parking lot that stretches into the site. This is the transitional housing facility and soup kitchen. And then there's a small area reserved for a playground as the site doglegs around the rear of the fire department. This is an aerial, obviously from above, and you can again see how the site wraps around the back of the fire station. And the site is a double frontage lot. It's well connected to public transportation routes and is easily walkable to downtown and all the amenities located there. Again, it's located between the fire department and Nolan Plumbing. And because of the site's proximity to both the fire department and the intersection at Monticello Avenue, all vehicular access must occur from 4th Street Southwest. So this is a survey. Again, this outline here is the existing shelter at the rear of the site. This is the 2 buildings that were built at the front. The most important goal for this project is allowing the existing shelter to remain operational during redevelopment. This drove the site plan and the proposal that you're going to see. Additionally, both the design team and the BAR agreed that the 56-inch oak tree that sits on Ridge Street, which is this little dot right here, should be maintained during redevelopment. These 2 requirements, again, are the primary drivers of the footprint of the building and its overall massing. So to speak to more of the goals, they include, again, increased capacity for shelter, food, and services, providing dedicated family spaces, providing inclusive spaces to meet diverse client situations, providing increased privacy and dignity for clients both in the shelter and when receiving social services, providing increased security and separation within the shelter to address safety concerns of both the clients and the staff, connect the various programs and improve adjacencies, provide better wayfinding to main entries and the various programs like the social services or training programs, allow for future flexibility and growth over time, and show the community of Charlottesville the need that is present here, as well as the work and services that are provided by the Salvation Army and its volunteers. So the site is located in the West Main East Mixed-Use District. This designation governs the uses permitted on the site that Matt went over, as well as the height, density, and form of the building. So we'll review some of the things that we're asking relief on in a moment. First, I'll go over the use in more details. Unfortunately, the color is not showing up on this, but it's in the packet. The same use currently exists on site, but we're asking for increased capacity. The use is broken down into 2 functions: the house of worship, which is referred to as the core, and the center of hope, which is the shelter care facility. A house of worship is a by right use, but the shelter care facility is only granted by the special use permit. The color coding that you cannot see, but is in the packet, is repeated in other tables and drawings to show the relationship between the various programs. You can see that we're increasing the capacity on site. Matt mentioned those numbers already. It's primarily for the shelter and soup kitchen, and secondarily increasing the classrooms and meeting rooms, which are shared between the uses. So I'm going to go through a series of perspective views that show the before and after conditions. This first one is from the intersection of Ridge and Monticello. Again, we're saving this oak tree at the front. And if you can go to the next. so the oak tree, and pulling the building away from it to preserve it requires some of these modifications to the zoning requirements. If you want to go to the next one. This is a view standing approximately on the bridge over the railroad tracks, looking towards the Salvation Army, and the one after that. Again, a view on that side. So we've tried to be frugal and efficient in the design while also reflecting the character of Charlottesville. The project is being funded by donations, and the capital campaign is in its early stages. I believe they've raised less than 2/3 at this point, and donations would be most appreciated. The project is currently being repriced, and the reason I bring this up is to inform you that the project may change in appearance as it continues through the public approval process. The site requires a certificate of appropriateness from the BAR. Go to the next one. So this is the current view from 4th Street. That is the building that will need to be maintained during construction. And the next one. So in its place is the parking lot, which can be the last component added to the site. Great, this is an aerial view, again, looking at towards downtown and West Main Street. The next one. So in particular, we're asking for relief because it is a double frontage lot with both Ridge Street as a primary street and 4th Street Southwest as a linking street. So we're asking for setback relief on the linking street, which is 4th Street Southwest. It's required to have a setback between 5-foot minimum and 12-foot maximum. We proposed a 10-foot minimum and no maximum. This allows us to pull the building towards Ridge Street and have a much greater setback on 4th Street. It helps with constructability so that while the existing shelter can remain intact during construction and that the green space and part of the parking lot can be used for laydown space. The project goals were to utilize the available height and leave undeveloped area open for future expansion. Again, this means that we're pushing the project towards Ridge Street so that we have space to expand in the future, which hopefully won't be necessary, but has been the pattern since they've inhabited the site. And modifying the minimum to 10 feet aligns with the street buffer requirements of 10 feet, which would then remain during future expansions. And the no max, again, permits what's shown here. So what you're seeing in red is the section cut, and then the majority of the building rises in the background behind it. The darker purple fill is the building envelope under the current zoning conditions. So again, we're meeting the setback with a chapel that pops out to Ridge Street on this side. This is the 4th Street side. We're set back much deeper on that side. This piece is the multi-purpose room that stretches towards 4th Street along the parking lot. These lines up here, this represents the height that is proposed as 8 stories under the future zoning ordinance. And if it were 10 stories, depending upon, again, how a shelter care facility is defined for affordable, it would be able to go up to 10 stories. And setbacks are actually would force the building, again, towards both streets, which would run into the same problem that we're having now. We're not actually trying to maximize the lot by making the building short and spreading out. Instead, we're trying to utilize the vertical area available right now and leave open space for future development. If you can go to the next slide. So this one is showing the footprint of the building to demonstrate the reduction in the build to percentage requirements. The purple building here in the parking lot, again, is the existing shelter that must remain during construction. This light-colored, salmon-colored footprint is the 1-story condition of the shelter. And then this darker pink condition is rising to 4 stories, again, closest to Ridge Street. This allows future expansion to happen over the multipurpose room in this vicinity, or a separate standalone structure to occur here, which will be in the short term developed as open space, green space, playground space, hopefully if the budget allows, and then can convert again to a building if necessary. But that is probably 20 years out, so no immediate goal to do another expansion in the near term. The requirements for this are to be in the build-to zone 80% at Ridge Street and 40% on 4th Street. We're only 32% at Ridge Street, and we're asking it for not to be required at 4th Street. At Ridge Street, again, this leaves space for the protected 56-inch oak to remain. And at 4th Street, it gives us this advantage of keeping the shelter occupied during construction and leaving open space. This is the site plan, overall site plan. So the next two items that we're asking for modification on relate to the parking. The parking is again located off of 4th Street Southwest and along the southern property line where the existing emergency shelter currently stands. So that's this dashed outline that runs through the parking lot. And the position of this parking allows for the larger green space to the north, which gives us a larger, more open space now, but again, larger footprint for a future expansion if necessary. And then we're going to zoom in on the next slide to the parking lot. So we've calculated that the required parking quantity would be 52, and we've added a table since the application that'll be seen on the next slide. Don't go there yet, please. But so we'll show you how we got to 52 in a moment. And we're proposing 32 spaces. Secondly, we're asking not to have covered parking, which is a unique requirement to the West Main East zoning district. We believe that both clients and other visitors to the site would be more comfortable and feel safer without it being covered. So we're asking for it not to be required. And Campbell stepped in. Do you just okay? So the parking table here, we've again color coded this. You can't see the colors to match the previous table. These are the major spaces in the facility. Well, all the spaces in the facility lumped into these categories. And the zoning code has a requirement for spaces based on either the square footage of that space or the quantity of bedrooms. And so we've calculated across the required parking for each of these categories. That brings us to 56 spaces. There's an allowable reduction of 2 spaces per use in the ordinance. So we've taken 2 spaces for the house of worship and 2 spaces for the shelter care facility out of that. That brings us to 52. Then we want to relay to you that why we are proposing the quantity of spaces we are, because it's come up as a neighborhood concern, is that the chapel is generating a significant number of spaces, 10.8. The soup kitchen is creating 11.2 spaces, and the multipurpose room is requiring 12.1 spaces. Those 3 spaces are never going to be used simultaneously. They are programmed for different times of the day, different days of the week. The chapel has service on Sunday at 11 a.m. and as well as Bible study Wednesday evenings, 6 p.m. The soup kitchen serves breakfast, lunch, and dinner, with dinner being the major service. It's also at 5:30. And then the multipurpose room is in the program to allow space for clients and visitors to stay prior to being allowed to go into the dining room for meal service. And it's also for special events that may occur once or twice a year for the telethon, coat drive, that are very limited occurrences. Again, those would not be scheduled at the same time as church service. So getting to the point, if we take out 2 of these 3 generators of parking, the 2 lower ones, it brings us down to 30 spaces. And there are currently 30 spaces on site, which answers one of your questions from earlier. We're currently proposing 32 spaces. We're asking for condition 4, even though it already has flexibility in it, to use 30 as the number rather than 32, just to give a little bit more flexibility to the Salvation Army so that they don't need to hire a professional to create the parking plan. Should there be a very slight change needed to the quantity, this allows them to potentially deal with trash that was unanticipated or a donation box that might not be currently shown on the site plan, or even, there could be something else that comes up, and that just eliminates the need for them to spend money on professional services immediately, gives them that buffer so that the money that they're raising through donations is actually going to the people that need it. So if we can go to the next slide. This is counts taken by staff over the course of the last week. So even though there are 30 spots on site, 15 was the highest quantity used when they were able to count them, and that was on Sunday for church service, which is when there's a lot of on-street parking also available. 15 for the current facility. We're obviously increasing it, so 30 is twice the 15, hoping you'll gravitate towards 30. If we can go to the next slide. And this last one demonstrates that there are 7 parcels that have either frontage or a side yard on 4th Street Southwest that are residential parcels on that street. 6 of those, which are shown shaded in red, all have off-street parking on their lot. And by my count, which was approximate and very conservative, there are at least 7 on-street parking spaces along the one side of 4th Street that has parking. When I was there to do this analysis, there were only 3 cars on street. So there was plenty of available parking on street, which hopefully addresses some of the comments that have come up from the neighborhood about concerns about parking and traffic on 4th Street. And then, next one. You want to speak it?
That's good. Sorry. Can you go back one slide? So those 5 lots also have off-street parking? Is that what you're saying?
They do.
Yeah, so another concern that was brought up was the entrance location. The entrance location currently along 4th Street is 30-ish feet to the north, page north here. Given that we're kind of switching where the parking lot and the building goes, the entrance gets shifted page south, which brings it a little bit closer to those off-street parking spaces. We took a look at this. I mean, there is still some distance, approximately 16 feet there between the entrances. A typical entrance like this would have a stop sign on the way out, so people exiting the parking lot would have to stop and look. And then it's a relatively typical situation of cars coming out from 2 different sides of the street. So we have looked at this, and with the stop sign at the Salvation Army, we don't foresee any issues with this condition.
This isn't currently written as a condition, but it was a concern brought up by a neighbor at the one neighbor that attended our community meeting. And that neighbor asked for a stop sign exiting the parking lot, and we can oblige that without a problem. We were already intending to propose that.
Yep.
I believe that ends our slides. So thank you for the consideration, and we're happy to field questions. And again, if I can't answer it, we have Salvation Army here to speak to it too.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, can you start?
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything. I'm just wondering, do you guys really think you can save the oak?
We've had a tree expert come out and analyze it. They believe it's in healthy condition at the moment. There is no basement under the chapel that's closest to it right now, so demolition will have to be done with care. But we'll be expanding the soil area at the tree. You could probably take over. And hopefully that will lead to a healthier tree in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think in reality, it's going to be difficult we just don't know what the tree roots have attached to underground, if they're, you know, attached to some of the building that we're gonna take out, but, you know, with the plan, we're trying to give it more space, and we'll work with the experts to do all that we can to save it.
Yeah, you guys are spending a lot of money to try to save the oak, so hopefully you can.
Yep. Mr. Duranzio.
I don't think I have anything either.
Mr. Hippo.
No questions?
Mr. Schwartz.
So obviously you're doing the more important thing, which is preserving the existing shelter during construction. Do you have a plan for how the parking is going to work during construction?
So at the moment, we've discussed, the Salvation Army has the donation center on Cherry Avenue. And they've talked about, they haven't created a plan yet, but they've talked about how they'll ask staff, which is the people primarily parking on site, to park at the donation center, and then they will commute them over from there during construction.
Okay, so there's some thought behind that. Okay,
Yeah.
great. And I guess, just to confirm, the chapel is pulled up to the minimum setback, not the maximum setback?
It's in between.
It's in between, okay.
It-
I had it in my head you guys were all the way at the back, but you're somewhere in between.
It's closer to the back than it is to the front to get that ramp in there, but it's not, I know. Show you this drawing.
Let's look at the roof plan.
So here's
Gotcha.
the min and max.
Okay, so you're about halfway in there.
Can you describe that for our viewers?
The front wall of the chapel is about halfway between the minimum and maximum setback line.
Thank you. Mr. Stolzenberg.
Thanks. I guess first one quickly. So you showed us that parking table. We don't need to go back to it. And you talked about the cooperative parking reduction. As I understand it, that's in the code and only needs administrative approval from the NDS director. So, you know, parking requirement defender as much as he is, you know, is there any reason you're asking us for it and not him?
I don't think we had gotten to the point of putting it in the packet when we made the application, so.
Gotcha. I mean, I'm fine with giving you the flexibility, but
We were asking for 0.
that's a good point.
As opposed
True.
to 30,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's fair. Okay, and then, so, I don't know if you were here during the pre-meeting, but I was asking about this pedestrian crossing from Ridge to Fourth, or, you know, sidewalk. It looks like there's a sidewalk along the north side of the site. Mr. Bob here pointed out that it has like doors. Is the idea that you're blocking pedestrian crossings?
So the existing condition does have a sidewalk along the northern boundary line between the fire department and the building. The client asked us to block it because they relayed to us that there are numerous people who obviously trespass across the property to shortcut through it rather than taking the city sidewalks, and that they cause problems with the clients on site. I've not witnessed that myself, so I can't speak exactly to what happens, but there's interactions that occur that they want to limit. And
Okay.
so they're asking us to, yes, put it, fencing that would block that cross traffic so that those people who are really just walking their dog or cutting across the property are forced to truly follow the street network.
Okay. Okay. And then, I guess last question, so on that other, if we go back to that front, like, view, sort of related to Mr. Mitchell's question about the tree, have you given any thought to, I don't want to add to your costs or anything, but like, maybe just a thought for site plan, is like, to doing a bump out at that crosswalk? I imagine many of your clients are crossing there to get to Food Master or to downtown, to shorten the crosswalk and potentially to sort of zigzag the sidewalk around to give you more soil or pervious area by the tree.
Just asking for a bump out.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, we have not really looked at that. I think one thing is that the wall in front of the tree, we're proposing to leave, that's the existing wall, so tearing that down, I think would be more disruptive to the tree.
Yeah.
So that wall would stay anyway.
Mhm.
We have not looked at a bump out, certainly something we can look at, there are some on-street parking in there that we're trying to keep as well. So just how that plays together,
Yeah.
it's something we could look at though, if it's interested. It is all in the right of way, and we aren't really proposing changes to the right of way right now. But if that's something that comes up in the site plan process, we can certainly look into it.
Okay, just wanted to plant that seed. And you do have a crosswalk and a fire hydrant, so it shouldn't, I think you could do it without disrupting too much on-street parking, but as you said, you're not really changing the front right now, so it's fair. All right, thanks.
I hesitate to raise this issue, but it concerned me, and I'd just like to note it. In some of the public comment, there was concerns that the police are regularly being called on the guests here. Is that standard? Is that, what's happening? I haven't been spying on the site, I don't know.
I have no idea. I'm gonna have to defer to the Salvation Army about that, our client, to speak to that question. But I will say that Captain Mark Van Meter is new to Charlottesville. His predecessor retired mid-June, and so he's only been here for 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. So I don't know if they'll have a response. Do you either? Sure.
Welcome to Charlottesville, sir.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Mark Van Meter. Anytime you bring together a group of individuals, you're going to have the potential of issues. We would all know that homelessness is oftentimes promoted by various reasons, loss of job, family situations, but some of homelessness comes as a result of mental health issues, drug issues. And so we're in a place of service to the community where we see a number of those people come to our property. And my staff, they are not trained, for physical restraint or anything like that, but we're not a medical facility. And so the best course of reaction is to make sure that our local police department is attentive and servicing as well. Keeps us safe, keeps the client safe, just provides a better environment. Questions on that?
Who should be handling that interaction? Should members of the public be handling that interaction, or is that better handled by your staff? It's
better handled by us because we're typically the ones that have the relationship with the clients, and we can help de-escalate situations. But it's like any given situation. You have individuals who want to promote their own cause and reasons, and oftentimes it goes against our policies, and so we just have to have somebody step in and help make sure that the policies are held strong.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Mr. Payne, questions for the applicant?
You sure?
Sure.
Okay. He's me now.
Congratulations. Mr. Pinckney.
Yeah, I, yes. So first of all, I think this is a great project. I'm excited to see that this is happening. I've been in the building twice, I think, with Vice Mayor Wade, who's not here with us tonight, but who volunteers all the time, and it's a real hodgepodge of buildings, and so this is exciting to see. On council, one of the things we're reckoning with all the time is how best to help those in our community who are unhoused. Can you remind me, so in terms of the increase in beds, what are we looking at here? Is this twice as much?
So
2x?
the current shelter has 58 beds, and the proposed capacity is 114 beds. That's in the emergency shelter component, so that's adding 56 beds.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
The transitional housing is currently 28 beds, spread across 9 units. We're gonna get those same 28 beds in 7 units, so
Okay.
there's no change to the transitional housing portion.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then the last question that I had, and this is just because I'm learning the lingo, the language. You mentioned the front, the build-to was within specifications, I guess, but on the back side, it was not. What is build-to? Is that the width of the building compared to the lot lines?
So those are two different issues.
Okay.
So the building facade is in the setback, min-max. The build-to percentage is a relationship of the width of the building frontage versus the overall width of the lot.
Got it.
As expressed as a percentage.
Okay.
And so that's where the width is less than what's required in the zoning ordinance.
And that's on the back?
That's on both the front and the back. So we're
Okay.
less on the front because of the tree.
Got it.
And we're not meeting it at all at the back because we don't have any building that's
it.
within that
All right.
zone in the back.
Thank you.
Ms. Spurrier?
All right, I did have a question.
Oh, please.
Sorry. I don't know why I did.
It's just so many Ps, it's hard. That's what we are.
On the parking, when you did the analysis, was there any sense of what is the difference between the number of parking spaces used over time between Salvation Army guests, volunteers, staff versus its use as kind of an informal parking lot that's overflow at events or things that happen at Tonsil Park?
It's mine, well, I'll let them, they did the analysis, so.
Yeah, so again, I asked my staff to just randomly count throughout the day as they were coming in, as they were leaving for lunch, those sort of things. I would say about a third of our numbers represent staff, and the balance represents individuals who are either coming to meet with us or are coming for the various shelter program or soup kitchen. So, you know, typically 4 to 6 cars for staff and up to 9, you know, for shelter guests and people coming for meal service.
Okay. And the only other question was, one of the proposed conditions is an S3 screening along the 4th Street southwest boundary. Have you given any specific thought or plans for what that would be?
So, a buffer is already required, and I think staff's language changed it to an S3 screening that gives us a little bit more flexibility to do it with either a fence or plantings. But I believe we have proposed in the, not necessarily in our rendered site drawings, but if you look at the civil landscape drawings, which I don't know that we included in the submission, we do have plantings along 4th Street, and they were represented in the perspective view from 4th Street, which is on page 17. There we go. So there will be screenings through here, and, you know, in this transitional zone before the parking starts, and then all the way up 4th Street this way. We also have a fence that surrounds the playground area. So there will be sort of layers of both trees, shrubs, and the fence along that boundary.
Yeah, because obviously, I mean, we've just got multiple people who live there. I do think it's fair to go above and beyond the bare minimum in terms of like screening for the folks who are going to live there all the time. Other than that, no other questions. And as others said, I think it's clearly something the city doesn't want to be an obstacle to trying to make happen if we're serious about our goals about homelessness reduction.
Thank you. Ms. Spurrier?
I'm glad to see that you've got greenery. Okay, I'm on. So I'm glad to see that you have greenery, particularly shrubs. The fence looks okay. What are you doing for your playground for our littles?
So that's probably going to depend on the budget. At the moment, we don't know whether it'll be in or out of the budget, but long-term, they hope to have playground equipment. They currently have, I think, a swing set and some other slide, some other basic playground equipment. The goal is to replace all of that. if the
So you're
budget can
doing
afford it.
separate fundraising for your playground,
Not yet.
but it's happening.
It'll depend if they can meet the budget goal, the fundraising goals.
The fundraising that you're doing now, though, from what I'm understanding, is for your structure and the increase in the beds for your residents. So you are saying that at some point, you will be doing something to improve the playground. I didn't say next week or next month, but at some point, that will be happening. Is that what I'm hearing?
At some point, that is the goal, to
Okay.
install a playground. in
Okay. What are we doing as it relates to construction to protect the Littles and the current residents?
So the current residents are in that building that's at the rear. There is a sidewalk along the front of that building. Grades are very difficult because there's also a lower level entrance there. There will need to be a temporary sidewalk ramp extension happening that connects that to 4th Street to allow egress that would need to also be protected from any of the construction activity.
What's your plan B for your oak tree?
To replace it, as staff calls for, with a large canopy tree, should it not survive, or multiple if we have space for.
So do you have renderings of that at somewhere?
No.
Okay. Right. You're up.
What, I know you haven't finished the fundraising phase of it yet, but what's the, maybe expectation is the wrong word, hope for when you would do the construction?
So once the fundraising reaches 50% of the construction cost, then the Salvation Army at large, the corporation, national district territory headquarters, will fund the remaining construction costs so that construction can start, but fundraising will be ongoing to basically raise the rest of that construction cost.
So what was the 2/3 figure I heard you mention before?
Matt mentioned that. I don't believe we're at 2/3 at all.
So that, the campaign goal is 22 million, construction goal is 17 million. We are at, right at 5 million for our major donor gifts, and I suspect that we will be at our 50% by the first of the year.
So whenever you would start, I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of, are we thinking this might be coming online in a year and a half?
We think the construction timeline, because we have to work around the existing shelter, and that's gonna be tricky.
Sure.
And extend the timeline on site. Construction will take anywhere between 18 and 24 months. So a year and a half to 2 years to construct the facility. And I think the site plan process will actually be the longest lead time leading up into when we can begin construction if fundraising stays on track, as Captain Van Meter indicated. So the timeline for site plan approval would probably be in the spring, if we can move that fast with city staff.
And then add 18 to 24 months from that?
Yeah, there'll probably be a buffer in there before they start.
So from spring of
but
2024,
summer,
earliest would be fall 2025.
Probably later. I think we projected maybe summer or fall of 26.
Okay. All right. That's all. Thanks.
Certainly. Mr. Stolzberg?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot. I've been thinking about this for a couple days, and I forgot to ask. So we obviously are kind of coming out of a global pandemic where congregate shelters, because of the contagious nature of the disease, were problematic at best. I don't know if you guys stayed open. Obviously, the feds gave lots of money to put people in hotels. Are you guys looking at any sort of enhanced ventilation or filtration that might, kind of reduce spread if we have something like that in the future?
Can you go to page 33 of the slideshow?
Oh, you guys are prepped.
Way in the back. So what is going to be pulled up is a shelter floor plan of the 4th floor. Keep a few more. There, that'll work. Yep. So this is the shelter floor plan. So the floor plan has 2 wings. This wing has the transitional housing in it, the apartments. This wing is the shelter portion on this side. So right now, the conditions for the men's shelter in particular, it's 1 large room with bunk beds.
Mm-hmm.
All 58 beds are in the maybe slightly under, because there's a few on the women's side, there's one separate room, but the majority of them are in one large bunk room. So to increase privacy, dignity, separation, we're creating alcoves where there'll be 4 people to an alcove around the perimeter of this. The building will be fully mechanically ventilated, and it'll meet ASHRAE standards for ventilation. So filtration is really the necessary part of that, I think, to control contaminants and spread of communicable diseases. And then we also have separate bunk rooms on both floors. So there's beds in this bunk room with its own ensuite bathroom, in this bunk room with its own ensuite bathroom. And those allow for either special accommodations or, say, isolation if someone, needs to be out of the general shelter area. And that happens on both the women's floor and the men's floor.
Great answer. Thanks. And are those lockers in front of each alcove?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you.
Anything additional for the applicant? Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to hear from the public on this issue.
All right. We will move forward with our current standard. Each speaker has the opportunity for 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission and City Council. We'll start with our in-person audience, and then we'll move to our virtual audience, and then we will alternate back and forth until everyone has had the opportunity to speak. We'll start with our in-person audience. Do we have interested speakers? We have a gentleman who has stood, and we'll let him come forward. Please state your name and your address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Frank Flaschenreim, and I live at 405 Dice Street. So I live on 4th and Dice, where the main entry corridor, I guess what you would call, for the property. We were shown a picture of 5 houses that are on 4th Street. The one thing I would say is maybe when you went and looked at your survey of that street and the parking available there, that was probably during the daytime. Most of those houses have one off-street parking spot, if they have one. I know I'm on the very corner. The house next to me does not have any. They have 2 vehicles. The one next to them has an ADU in the back that they rent out as an Airbnb, and they have 2 vehicles on top of that with 1 space. So there's that kind of situation that happens there. That particular street, when there is cars parked on the street, is a single lane road then. So you're talking about having construction vehicles coming down that road, I assume, for entry to the property and all residents. My other concern would be, when I understood that there'd be 6 staff vehicles there in a given daytime. I'm sure there's more than 6 staff. And then if you're talking about residents and we're talking about doubling the number of beds, I do want to say that I'm definitely in favor of this. I just would want the city to address, not necessarily even the Salvation Army per se, but that street dead ends there then. And so it's very limited access. And so figuring out kind of what that looks like for the neighborhood. And then I would just say, no, I'm not even gonna say that. So that would be my main commentary there is again, the access, because even Dice Street is a single lane road when cars are parked on it. So, again, it's very limited access. So, yep. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we'll move to our virtual audience. Our first speaker is Brian Crenshaw. Brian? Mr. Crenshaw?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Brian Crenshaw. I live at 225 4th Street Southwest in Charlottesville. I'm directly behind the Salvation Army. I'm concerned about the Salvation Army proposed changes to on-site parking and the removal of covered parking requirements. First, they're requesting a reduction of on-site parking from 52 spaces to no minimum. While the applicant has provided proposed providing 32 spaces, the request to eliminate the minimum requirement is problematic. As my neighbor just mentioned, that the street is very small, and in its own drawing from the applicant, they indicate that the driveway would be moved, which would actually eliminate a parking space for my neighbor. In addition, there's also plans for the Monticello Ridge intersection, which also will eliminate all on-street parking to the on Ridge Street in front of Noland. And so I think that this is a great project, and it's something that we need to move forward for. But we also need to understand that the expansion that is being asked for is 50% more beds. 50% more beds. And while they say that the people do not drive, I can confirm that the parking lot has been full, and with an additional bed space, you will see more people overflowing. And the request to remove all parking is just not in line with the use that they are proposing. I also want to express my objection to removing the requirement that limits the percentage of off-street parking spaces that can be open surface parking. Eliminating this requirement, if it's in West Main South, the reason why they have that requirement only in this zone is because this is the entrance, and it's a important part that we hide the parking, but that we don't push all the parking down to the residential streets and cause issues there. Like I said, I'm in favor of the project, but not with the current parking reductions or the removal of the structured parking requirement.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, turn to our in-person audience. We have a gentleman, hand raised.
Hello, excuse me. My name is Chris Dunbar. Me and my wife live at 227 4th Street, actually Brian's neighbor. And I think, what has been said is true. Talking with our neighbors, we're definitely in favor of the project, but our concerns are the entrance on 4th Street. There's really just one car can kind of go at a time. To answer your question, there are emergency vehicles that go down. There's dumpsters, there's trash pickups. I wasn't aware that the sidewalk would be cut off too. So, you're also looking at more foot traffic coming around the Noland sidewalk, which, if you go on a snowy day, you'll see that rarely it is shoveled. It's in kind of states of disrepair. On our block, technically, I think there are 7 houses. There are 2 domiciles set back. So technically, there's probably 9 sort of parties that need parking on that street. So there's a little more parking necessary on that street. There's also 5 children under the age of 5, all in that 6-block radius. So adding traffic more, I think, is might not be the best idea, especially if you have Ridge Street. I don't know how much the project look at an entrance from Ridge Street, but it just seems like kind of a natural entrance as opposed to a dead end 4th Street kind of behind the Salvation Army. And to answer your question, I actually don't think there is. I don't see a lot of parking from like Thompson Park or anything there. Just to say that. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right, our virtual audience, do we have anyone else who would like to speak? Please raise your hand in the app. All right, I don't see anyone at this time. Do we have any other in-person audience speakers? Yes, ma'am, thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Smith, and I do work for the Salvation Army. I am the resident program manager of the shelter. I've been with the Salvation Army a total of 18 years, 6 years in the position of the shelter manager. And I just want to share a few stories with you on what I've been able to see with the shelter residents, but I call them my guests because they are a guest while I'm there at the shelter, and how much this new facility is needed. So the first one that I want to bring to mind is, I'm just going to do first names. A lady by the name of Joy and her husband Patrick. They checked in. Joy was from Michigan and Patrick is from Virginia. He was actually transferred here from another area in Virginia. He had an IT job waiting for him in Charlottesville, but they didn't know anybody here in Charlottesville, so they came to the shelter. They moved out in a couple of months after working very hard. They actually had lost custody of their 2 girls because they were traveling, and they didn't want to bring them on the road with them. So when they found the housing, they actually gained custody of their 2 children, and they are doing well now. I also have a gentleman by the name of Michael. He was one of my favorite stories to tell. He checked in July. Excuse me. He was with us for almost a year. He checked into his new apartment, and when he arrived, he was just evicted from his place. He was sharing with other persons. They left him to pay the bill, and he wasn't able to. He had to humble himself to come to the Salvation Army. And having this on his record, they also tried to get him to pay the full amount that was due. We actually referred him to legal aid to help him with that bill. They cut the rent down to half so he can pay. And then he also was referred to another organization that paid off some hospital bills he had. And when he left the Salvation Army, he left there with $10,000, and he was able to get his own apartment at that time and live sufficiently. And he also worked at Walmart for 7 years. So these are the people that come into our resident for help. And then I have a young lady. This was my first family that came into the shelter. BH, she was a single mother. She was pregnant. She had 2 children. At the time, she was staying from house to house. Her mother said she could not stay there. When she came in, she had such a terrible attitude. But I broke her out of that, because what we have to do, we have to show love, and we have to meet people where they are, show them compassion. So with the encouragement of me and my staff and the guidance, she was in the shelter for 1.5 years. She moved to her own apartment 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Think about that. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, her and her children moved into their own place where she was able to have Thanksgiving with her family. Today, she is a homeowner. She is working full-time, and she still calls to let us know how she's doing.
Thank you very much.
This is the people that we really need to help, and there's so many more. So this project is needed, and it's needed badly. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll check again with our virtual audience. All right, seeing no speakers there, do we have any more in person? Yes, sir.
Thank you again for allowing me to speak. In 1934, the general of the Salvation Army was Evangeline Booth, and she said these words: "There is no reward equal to that of doing the most good to the most people in the most need." Last year, the Salvation Army provided over 15,000 nights of lodging in our shelter. The Salvation Army is one of those agencies that you wish you could work out of business. I've been in executive management 30 years, 15 years with the Salvation Army, and unfortunately, I've not seen much of a dent in that. Homelessness is part of our society. It is part of our population. And so it is one that we want to deal with integrity, and bring them just to the opportunity to better their lives. I have only been here 3 weeks, but I see a staff, I see a facility that have been working hard with what they have. Last year, we served over 60,000 meals out of our soup kitchen. 60,000 meals. And those are substantial numbers. During a pandemic, such as you brought up, sir, the Salvation Army is built on pivoting. We know how to pivot when it comes to natural disasters, when it comes to communicable diseases, when it comes to these type of events. We have just learned how to pivot and work and do what we do. In my last community, we were serving approximately 200 people, 200 cases per month during the height of COVID we served over 2,000. Those numbers transfer to a community like Charlottesville as well. We don't close our doors. We can't close our doors. Where do the homeless go? Where do people go for their meals, for lodging? So we remained open here in this community as well. And I have known for a short while that we were coming to Charlottesville, and so I started looking at videos and pictures and things. I've been very, very impressed with the staff, with the facility, with the work that the Salvation Army has done in this community. So I just encourage you to look honestly at this project. We are not working ourselves out of business, unfortunately. So we have to plan for the future. We have to plan for the opportunities to serve in our community in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Just checking in our virtual audience. I don't see any speakers. Our in-person audience, do we have any additional speakers? All right, Chair, it looks like our speakers have spoke.
Thank you very much. I'd like to close public comment at this time. And let's consider the issue. Mr. Mitchell, can you start us off?
Sure, it'll be brief. I actually walked the site yesterday, I think, and they've got a beautiful playground over there right now. Absolutely beautiful. Hopefully they'll be able to expand or at least keep what they've got down the road. 4th Street is a challenge. It's very narrow, and I think sidewalks only on the eastern end, I think, if I remember correctly, or maybe the western end. And parking's on the western end, I believe. So parking will be an issue that we're going to have to deal with. And hopefully, at least pieces of recommendation number 4 in Matt's staff report will help us to work on that and keep the city engaged with the applicant as we develop it. But we need to do this. The work that's being done there is important, and it's important to expand the work that's being done there. So I'm just hoping that we can also work out the parking issue. At the end of the day, I'm going to vote to recommend that we approve this application.
Mr. Dronzio?
Thanks. I don't see any need to parrot Commissioner Mitchell's concerns about the parking. I've got them too. But and the traffic issue in particular with that narrow street is what it is. And my sentiments mirror his.
Mr. Bob?
Likewise, I hear everyone on the parking. I hope that there's a way to work that out with the site plan and all that kind of stuff, and just figure that out. But this project is much needed, and it's a great project, and I will vote to approve it.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz?
Agreed on all of that. I actually have one tiny little thing, which is going to drive Aaron nuts because I mentioned it at the BAR meeting as well. We do have, well, we're proposing some streetscape standards in our new zoning code. And I recognize that they are going to a huge effort to save this large tree. But I believe if they were to try to meet what our future zoning code is going to be, there would be a requirement for some additional trees on Ridge Street. So that's not like a deal killer for me, but I did want to bring that up for the rest of the commission in case it seems like it's a missed opportunity if we don't catch it now, especially since that large oak tree may not be there forever. So it would be good to try and reestablish some streetscape along Ridge Street.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Well, I actually don't agree with the parking issue, based on those parking counts. And, if you look at Street View and all the historical aerials, it's almost always practically empty. It sounds like if there's any parking issue at all, it's an event parking issue, which I think needs a different sort of solution. But you can't just throw a giant parking lot at it for a couple days a year. Rather, shared parking, that sort of thing is more effective. One, I think maybe technical point that I think came out of one of the public comments, I think might be useful to everybody, If it could be done with the fire department without disrupting vehicles, to get an access easement during construction so that construction vehicles could cut through that parking lot instead of going all the way down 4th Street. It seems like that would be a lot more convenient for everybody. I don't know who you have to talk to at CFD to make that happen, but maybe someone, if they're listening on council or city staff in the city manager's office, could help that along. Jason, make sure you get that bit about donations being welcome in your article. But other than that, I'd like to commend you all on doing this project. You're doing the Lord's work, maybe literally, and it's very badly needed in the city. Thanks.
Personally, I would love for you all to be out of business and find something else to apply your talents and hard work to. That is the world I want to be in, but it's going to be a while. For now, I'm excited to see this project come forward. I see tremendous value in it, tremendous need for it. I'm encouraged about the parking analysis. It's the mixed use. This is the dream of the zoning code, to mix the uses, to mix the parking demand and the parking issues. So that's exciting to see, the theory going into practice a little bit. The tree issues, I'm hopeful about the parking lot or possibly the playground area. I don't think it's necessary that it be part of the streetscape, although I certainly see value in that. Those are my big thoughts at the moment. Mr. Payne.
I'll go. Yeah, I mean, just a few thoughts. In terms of the parking, I don't know if this is what the neighborhood would want or if it would be a solution, but I wonder if permit parking for residents could play any role in terms of being a solution to that concern there. I would agree with the point that if more tree canopy could be there, that would be a positive thing. And I would just reiterate again, I think the screening along 4th Street Southwest, if it's done intentionally, could make a real positive difference long-term versus if it's just the bare minimum. But other than that, this is obviously a project that it's critical we find a way to get done and not become an obstacle to.
Mr. Bixton.
I essentially agree with what Michael just said. I think it's a great project. I'm sympathetic to the concerns about parking. I do think this is something we're going to face throughout the city in terms of, with the new zoning work we're trying to do, being thoughtful about how we manage parking, permit parking or other options like that. So hopefully there'll be some creativity around how we address that. That said, I think it's a really good project. We certainly need it, as I've mentioned before, and I'm grateful to see that this is moving forward.
Ms. Perrier.
I appreciate the concerns of the residents and their willingness to be supportive of the effort, but I am concerned about their concerns as it relates to parking. So hopefully there's a way that the residents and the people doing the construction can come up with a solution, and if the city needs to assist in helping them with a solution, that we can do that. I'm glad to know that the playground is to Mr. Mitchell's standards, but working with children, as I have done, don't ask, don't tell, there's always something new and great on the playground scene. And I feel that the residents of the Salvation Army deserve what everyone else has. So I want the playground to be the latest and greatest, and if we need to have a separate fundraising effort for the playground, we need to get on that.
Thank you. Mayor Snook.
Maybe I wasn't listening at the right time. I'm looking at condition 4 suggested by the staff, which deals with parking, and I don't understand how that's expected to work in practice. It says no minimum parking is required on the subject property, but should the number drop below 32 spaces, applicant will work with the city traffic engineer to develop master parking plan. That if by the time the site plan is actually brought forward, there are fewer than 32 spaces shown on the site plan, that somebody will do something? Is that the trigger point that we're talking about here?
Mr. Offaly?
Mayor, yes, I can kind of address that. During their application, so the different departments looked at this, city traffic engineer was one of them. He didn't have an issue with 32 spaces, but they're requesting to have 0.
Right.
So the condition is to be, you're showing 32, but you're asking for 0, so during your site plan configuration, that number could drop down. If you drop below 32, we want to look at that again to make sure that you're meeting parking needs, and if there's some other solution we can come up with through this parking plan. So that's kind of what the number is. Yes, we looked at this at 32, but you might go below that. If you're going below it, we want to look at it again.
I think in the condition if 20 years from now they make the decision to build on that site or whatever, that's going to require a site plan amendment. So any reduction in the parking from what they have now, once it's in the build condition, any reduction is going to trigger a site plan amendment, which would then trigger that condition review. Is that correct?
Kind of correct in both. So I mean, we haven't gotten to site plan review. So if between, say, City Council adopts this and grants them, it could grant them what they're asking for, which is 0. And between that and the first time we look at it, which would be at preliminary or final site plan review, they're showing 28. That drops below the 32, so there needs to be some sort of parking plan that comes out of it. Or it could be there at 32, they come back in 20 years and they're below that 32, we would create a parking plan then. So it's trying to catch that. We looked at it at 32 for what was shown in the materials, but they're requesting less than 32. So it's a way to try to accommodate the request for that 0, but give staff the opportunity to come up with a plan if they drop below what they've shown.
So if we end up saying, of course, if we end up saying 0, period, then there's nothing further for you all to do as it relates to parking.
So as part of their site plan, if council says 0, and as part of their site plan, they show 32 spaces, we wouldn't require this basically written document showing how they're going to manage parking. But once they drop below that 32, that's where we would require it. It's really to leave that room so they can adjust. If they change it, it'll look different than what we saw during the SUP application to what we see during preliminary or final site plan or site plan amendment in the future.
Okay, so I guess I think I understand how you all are going to handle the issue, and it sounds like that if we adopt it with condition 4, then well, actually, I'm still not sure I understand. If we're saying no minimum parking is required, but if it drops below 32, then we've got some work to be doing. Doesn't it sound like there's some minimum parking being required?
But by doing the plan with the city engineer, it could come up with something different. It could come up with cooperative parking, could come up with off-site parking that would count toward it. It's trying to give that flexibility of there needs to be a parking demand plan in place if you're going to drop below 32 spaces.
But I gather that the essence of condition 4 is that the eventual remedy that is going to be worked out is not going to involve the planning commission or city council.
Correct. No, it'd be just staff.
And I'm curious, and maybe somebody from the applicant can address this. I understood, and again, I was listening through the part where you're talking about 32 and different overlapping uses and different times and so on. What's the argument for 0?
So I would say the argument for 0 is because Two reasons. It gives the site more flexibility in the future. What we understand is that when the new zoning ordinance is adopted, this site with its current SUP, and Matt or can jump in if I'm wrong, will become a non-conforming, well, the SUP will ride, and the new zoning ordinance will not be the rules in effect if we go in to develop something else. We'd have to come in and modify the SUP, ask for, right, a rezoning.
I'm gonna defer to my boss.
I'm not sure I'm entirely understanding what you're asking, but, so, the SUP will control indefinitely, right? Now, if you come in and you're redeveloping the site and it's consistent with the new zoning, you'd be able to move forward as under the new zoning. Otherwise, you have to seek an amendment to the special use permit.
Right, so in order to not have to seek an amendment to the special use permit and not have to go through a rezoning application in the future after the new zoning ordinance is approved, we're asking for 0 so that it aligns with what's currently proposed as the future zoning ordinance.
But if you know you're gonna have your own staff anyway, it's unrealistic to think you would not have at least 10 parking spaces needed. Don't you think?
Possibly.
Plus, each one of the 3 uses you've designated, you've said one would require 10, one would require 11, one would require 12. You're always gonna, no matter what the use is, you're gonna need at least 10 spaces.
Yeah, we identified that we think there's 30 spaces needed. That's why we're asking for the 32 to drop to 30 in the language. And we don't have a problem with recommended condition number 4 triggering that. We just like a little bit more flexibility so that between now and when we submit the site plan, if we lose 2 spaces because we get into other requirements on site, like increased trash requirements after we go through full analysis of that with the trash hauler, or we find that they want to place a donation box there for donations that take up a parking space without having to decrease the playground or, you know,
I guess
other
what I'm wondering is why
modifications.
don't we say, we know even if it's only to provide for your own staff and nobody else coming into the property, you're gonna need at least 10 spaces. So instead of saying no minimum parking required, we're gonna require at least 10. And if you wanna go below it to 32 and go through that whole process at the site plan process, I mean, I really don't understand why you would have a situation like that where you would ever want to have no parking spaces. And if you're never gonna have no parking spaces, what's the harm in requiring at least some parking spaces?
We can have it listed that way. We don't have an issue with that. We were just aligning it.
What we're asking for there is that it just comply with the future ordinance, which is 0. So
The future ordinance that has not yet been passed by anybody.
True.
Okay.
But that's usually when we come to these, we get asked, how does whatever we're proposing, by the way, I'm John Matthews, so, how does whatever we're proposing compare to what's being floated as part of the future ordinance? And we were thinking that we would, to get the maximum flexibility, as Erin said, just go with what you currently are proposing in the future ordinance. So that's where that came from. But as Erin said, we're happy with 10.
To be clear, what you're referring to is what consultants have proposed, not the planning commission and not city
Well,
council.
it's the only thing we have.
I understand.
It's the only thing we
Yeah.
have. We have the current
What would be
ordinance.
required under current zoning? 52? Okay. Thank you.
So, one question maybe for Matt, based on that, is like, so they're saying they're going to 0 during construction, right? Like, is that gonna violate even this ordinance, or this as phrased? Like, they'd have to do the plan for that period, or?
For like temporary?
Yeah. Because the requirement applies all the time, right? Like, you couldn't even like have a big party in your parking lot if it's gonna violate your parking requirements, right?
Are we speaking for current, say, if they did not receive the reduction to 0?
Yeah.
It would probably need to come up during their site plan. How are you gonna handle this during construction to meet your parking requirements?
So if there's a 10 requirement, they'd have to have 10 on site during construction. At least
If it was
as
a-
long as that building's open.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends on what they're serving in the building. So that requirement might dip, you know, if your staff was originally 6 and you needed 8 spaces, and during construction, you're still open, but your staff is down to 2,
But the
we would have
requirements
to.
aren't based on staff, right? So if, let's say they close everything but the shelter, which required 8 or something, right? It would be 8, no matter how many staff work there.
So
Yeah.
we're gonna have parking on site for shelter residents during construction, that would be disastrous.
Well, that's what I mean, right? Is that if you don't go to 0, then during construction, you're violating it, or like you can't meet it. So you need that flexibility at a minimum for the during construction phase, right?
It would be a little more nuanced and it would be looked at site plan phase. Like they would need to provide parking to match whatever they're doing on site. So typically, yes, we're looking at construction where there's nothing going on site, so we don't think about it.
Yeah.
But for this, we would, as staff, be looking at it. You're gonna still be doing X on site. How are you parking X? Now, X might be smaller during that, so there might be a way. The code does have temporary construction parking. I can't give you probably a satisfactory answer other to say it would be looked at during
Would
site
their
plan review.
solution of having the shuttle satisfy that, or does it have to be on-site for that project?
Could be off-site, but that's out of range.
And it again depends on if we're looking at saying we're following current code for parking requirements, or are we using this, going to 0, but having a parking, basically a parking demand, something worked out with the traffic engineer. It would be a lot more strict under just current code. You would have to follow current code, whatever that lays out to be. I believe it's 25 or 30% is the maximum you can reduce parking through stuff like cooperative parking or bike racks or being close to a bus thing. You can never reduce that 100% under current code. There is a max you can actually reduce.
The parking would be reduced at the center during construction regardless. So if you have 30 spaces there now, and we've got all these trucks and all this doing this, that, and the third, you can't have 30 spaces there for people to park because you've got your construction crews there. So what do we do to have space for the people that have to work in that building? Or people that are coming to volunteer in that building? Everything that happens in that building is not remote. So if you're saying you're gonna have 0 parking and 15 people have to be there, then what are you gonna do?
And that is definitely something that we have to be worked out, and it's something we look at site plan review. We don't typically look at it at SUP level.
Okay.
We look at it when we're actually getting the documents
So
for
at site
construction.
plan review, you're gonna also be talking to the residents about their concerns about being able to get in and out.
Yes, if this was to move, the kind of the next steps, if they were to get to the SUP, there is when they submit a site plan, there is a site plan conference that is open to the public. And then at the end of the process, when there's an approved plan, there is a pre-construction meeting that is staffed with the applicant that talks through all the construction aspects. This would be a little more complicated because you're keeping a lot of the things going on site. So yes, it does add another level of complexity.
So just to be totally clear, unless we give them maximum flexibility on parking requirements, the code is gonna require some amount of parking on site, meaning they either have to shut down activities, close the shelter even, or somehow get an on-site parking spot.
Correct. If we just look at it as they have to follow the code for parking, if they are going to be doing activities that are allowed in the zoning code that has parking requirements, they're gonna have to meet those parking requirements. It just might not be, the number might just fluctuate depending on what they are doing on site at the time. That's, I mean, it'll be very, almost phased. But yes,
Yep.
that is the, they
So
have to meet.
they won't need 30, but they'll need some.
They will need whatever the corresponding amount to whatever activities they are providing on site.
Yeah.
Clear
It
as mud?
sounds like, oh, please.
I was saying clear as mud.
Could we
More than
temporarily say during construction there will be 0 because they're providing that shuttle from, and then it can come back after to a minimum of 10 or whatever we feel comfortable with?
I think that's a reasonable condition, planning commission could suggest, because again, they're trying to keep their services going. So I think, you know, addressing parking for construction could be a condition that planning commission could
But if you
address.
say 0 and you have an activity with 15 parking spaces needed, then what do you do?
It
I mean, are
probably
you gonna
won't,
shuttle those people from somewhere and the activity is right there at the center?
they probably won't have, well, I'll let them speak, but I doubt there'll be activities when they're limited capacity, just the housing.
And I'll just, before I let the applicant speak in, I will just reiterate, you know, planning commission, that they are asking for 0. Planning commission does not have to recommend 0. Planning commission can have a number. City council can also, this is what they're asking for is the use, which is shelter care facility, and then the city council has the opportunity to adjust things like setbacks and parking requirements. So city council could suggest a different number
Yeah,
than
because
0.
Because if you're volunteering to serve meals, you know, for whatever occasion, and I'm not talking about holidays, they do meals 365 days a year. You're gonna have the people that are coming to serve the meals be over here in Jablip somewhere, and you're gonna bus them in to do the meals? No, they're gonna go to the facility.
Can we ask
I-
the applicant to?
Can we recognize? Yeah.
Ms. Hannigan, could you please give us some insight on this?
I want to clarify the uses that are in the emergency shelter at the rear of the site that's being maintained during construction. That building only has the emergency shelter in it. The soup kitchen is in one of the other buildings that's more central to the site. So meal service will not occur on that site during construction. It'll only be the shelter use. There are some social service offices, I believe, that are also in the building that's being maintained.
So what I was gonna say, the shelter only currently has 3 to 4 employees working in that building. The kitchen staff, the administrative staff will all have to be moved off-site. So, you know, it's really just the shelter staff. So when we talk about having people park at our thrift store building and bringing them up, we're talking about a minivan could do that. We're not talking about our bus needing, you know, to transport people. And we can just simply require of our shelter guests, we cannot accommodate vehicles at this time. You have to figure out something else.
Thank you. I would be very interested this time in a motion.
Mayor, before they introduce a motion, was there something we needed to?
I think we did this after they.
After, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, it's only a 7-minute walk from where they're talking about putting people. But I have a motion, I think.
Please have that
Maybe my screen will stop freezing. I move to recommend approval of this application for a special use permit in the West Main East Zone at 2900, 29000, 207, and 211 Ridge Street to permit a shelter care facility with alterations to street wall and parking regulations as indicated in the application with the following conditions. The 9 conditions recommended by staff, except that condition 4 will be modified to per section 34-162. No minimum parking shall be required on the subject property during construction. However, the applicant will work with the city's traffic engineer to develop a parking plan for the subject property for uses during construction. In addition, we'll say no minimum parking is required on the subject property, but should the number drop below 30 spaces, the applicant will work with the city's traffic engineer to develop a master parking plan for the subject property. This plan will be kept on file with the city and may be updated or altered from time to time with authorization of the city's traffic engineer. The plan, the rest is as it is in the packet. I think everyone got it. Just to say what I'm doing there is saying during construction, they don't have a minimum, but they have to make a plan. And then after construction, I'm saying they don't have a minimum, but you guys can change it to 10 if you guys want to later. It's a different clause, it'll be easy. And they have to make a plan if it goes under 30. That's the two flexibility.
And I would like to second that.
I hear a second from Mr. Duranzia. Discussion on this proposal? Or motion?
And the only thing I had was 10, and then they can change it after if they'd like to, whatever number they want. So, that, no.
I mean,
But
I
just
guess.
I pulled 10 out of the air doesn't mean there's any.
15.
Well, I mean, that
The
is
maximum.
roughly what the common among all the
Yeah.
uses is. I guess what I'd say is, I think it makes sense to give them maximum flexibility. As you said, for their own uses, they're probably gonna need some, but, they can figure that out, I think. And obviously they figured it out to the extent that they're putting in 30, 32 even, they're increasing the amount of parking. But I see no problem with trusting them to handle that.
Well, and it's trusting them and trusting staff to work with them to come up with a plan. The experts on staff knowing how many parking spaces they're actually gonna need versus us coming up with a number.
Yeah.
Any additional discussion on this motion? Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Schwartz?
Yes.
Mr. Duranzio?
Aye.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Habab?
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
And Mr. Soliates?
Aye.
Okay.
Mayor Snook, do you have an additional item you need to read or consider?
Apparently so, and I'll call on our city attorney to tell us what we're doing here. Apparently there is a new amendment to one of the statutes that requires some additional something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would simply offer, pursuant to the discussion in the very short memo, council to consider, a motion pursuant to the 2023 amendments to the Code of Virginia, Section 15.2-2204, to defer further consideration of council's intention to adopt SP 23-004 to council's August 7th, 2023 meeting, or such later meeting as council may direct.
Can we have a motion to that effect from someone on council? Second, anybody?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Okay, the motion carries. I guess we've solved that problem, and we're gonna have to institutionalize that, I think, from here on out.
Thank you very much. At this time, do we have any additional business that we would like to consider? I believe this public hearing is at a close. Thank you all very much. Additional business, I would also entertain a motion at this time.
I have one.
Please state that motion.
Yeah, so this is in light of a conversation at the very beginning of this meeting between Commissioner Schwartz and Mr. Freeze, where they were sort of ruminating on how complicated it is to comply with this, but keep careful of this second say. We got an overlay of this instruction, these appeals, and all the moving parts involved, particularly with the zoning. And I would point out that July 11th, to that end, is National Free Slurpee Day. It is National Mojito Day, and it is National Blueberry Muffin Day. And these are, I'm sure these are all worthy, and we can get behind at least 2 out of the 3 for most of us, not necessarily the same 2 out of 3. But, someone unthinking put all 3 of these into July, which is National Horseradish Month. And I cannot see where you might be able to persuade me to try a horseradish mojito at best, but the other 2 not so much. So my point there being that when we adjourn and consider when we come back to our work session on Thursday on the zoning, that we not trip ourselves up by imposing one set of rules that are going to be subjected to another set that we didn't think about. And just be careful about interlocking regulations, and that we adjourn on that thought.
Do I hear a second? All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Neither does he.
Thank you all. Good night.